this episode of the Wagging Tales podcast. On this episode, we are going to be looking at appropriate socialisation for dogs. Now, as I've mentioned before, this is not quite what people think. Previously, people used to think that socialisation was just a list of different things to expose your dog to. That's really not what socialisation is, especially when you're living in an environment which is a city or an environment where the dogs are not overly comfortable. The role of appropriate socialisation is to effectively socialise and ensure your dog's comfort in the environment that they are living in. So it's not so much just about getting your pet to be well behaved. It's about making sure that they are comfortable. Many of you that have listened to this podcast for a while, or anybody that's worked with me, will have heard me saying this before. If you want your dog to be well behaved and safe to be around, your dog needs to be around people that are well behaved and safe to be around. When your dog feels safe, that's when your dog will behave appropriately. A large part of this is socialisation. So what are we actually going to be looking at here? Well, we're going to take a very quick dive into what socialisation actually means as far as the more sort of stringent socialisation period of dogs. Now, this is very critical, but as you will see, socialisation is something that needs to be done throughout your dog's life in the same way that it needs to be done throughout our lives. Because if we don't socialise, we end up becoming a little bit socially awkward, something that I have definitely seen myself doing from time to time. So, first things first, understanding socialisation. Appropriate socialisation. First point, building comfort levels in various environments. This means that should you have a dog such as a border collie who has been shaped genetically for the fields with a farmer or a shepherd and doing the herding work, and now all of a sudden you've got this dog in an apartment or a smaller house, well, on top of everything else that you need to do for that dog, you've got to ensure that that dog has got comfort levels in those environments. Dogs like herding breeds. So you've got everything from your border collies to all your shepherds. So German shepherds, Dutch shepherds, all these things, as well as one that a lot of people forget is not a shepherding dog, but your ex-strays, your street dogs. Any dog, whether it be shepherding dog, guarding dog, or an ex-stray, these guys have been shaped, whether it be through natural selection, whether it be in the case of your street dogs, or whether it be through domesticated breeding programs. These dogs are being designed or shaped to be aware of everything. Now, all dogs are aware of a lot of stuff, but especially when you're dealing with dogs like this, you've got to be aware that the environment is a huge impact on them. Okay? So this is one of the reasons why you see so many border collies that live in apartments and they're nervous wrecks, because they've not been appropriately socialised to the environments, whether that be busy roads. I've worked with many border collies out here, to be fair, in Singapore, and a lot of the times it's trucks, traffic, kids on bikes, scooters, kids running around the swimming pool, all of these different triggers which are setting the dog off because they've not been appropriately socialised to those environments. And if that leads on for too long, then we've got to actually go back and do rehabilitation for that, which I'll also talk about a little bit later. So environments, very, very important. We've got to ensure that we are building positive association to them. Interactions with people, animals, potential triggers. That's basically what people think of when they talk about socialization. They used to give these lists, and these lists used to be like man in a hat, man in a high-vis vest, somebody in a Christmas sweater, big women, small women, children. They give all this list of different types of people, and that was the socialization. But it's more than that. It's different animals, different potential triggers, different situations, different environments. Understanding how you should be moving to ensure that your dog feels safe. And if your dog feels safe with you, they will feel more confident and things start to move along much, much better. So, talking about the list, we're not going to go through a list, but it is just an idea of what you've got to think about when you're doing this kind of socialization. With people, you've got different ages, genders, ethnicities, attires, whatever it is that you feel that happens in your area, you've got to make sure that your dog is cool with that. So if you live in a city where there's a big population of goths, for example, it's a good idea to socialize your dogs around people that have that kind of dress sense, the attire, whatever you want to call it. No judgment on my side, obviously. But you've got to make sure that you're not going to have your dog being set off by people that are dressed differently, different ethnicities, different genders, different ages. You may find that your dogs might have a leaning towards one or the other of these. Normally, this comes with learned behavior. For example, Athos, when we first got him, he really didn't like older men. And this was because he was from a factory where older men were not very nice to him. So sometimes you've got to understand what your trigger points are with your dogs and focus on that a little bit more. Animals, think about where you are. If you live in the tropics, yes, you've got other dogs, you've got other cats, you've got smaller pets, but then you've also got things like otters, lizards, snakes, monkeys, things that could set your dog off. You've got to ensure that when your dog sees a monkey, it doesn't freak out and start barking. It chills out and keeps distance. If your dog sees a monitor lizard or a snake, they're not going to get all excited and run for it. They're going to back off. And people say to me, "Oh, Fraser, but the dog's nature is to chase these little things. So, it's something that can't really be done." Right. Let's be cards on the table here, guys. That's nonsense. You can do it. Our boy Porthos was born in the jungle. If I allowed him, he would literally go for everything that moves. But instead of just accepting the fact that your dog is going to be putting themselves in danger because they're going to be going for snakes and lizards and things like that, you've got to do certain things like replacing the behavior. So for Porthos, many, many times you'll have seen my videos, Porthos playing fetch, Porthos playing tug. He's very game orientated. So part of the socialization for Porthos was that alternative behavior. He sees a lizard, he sees a monkey, he sees whatever, the ball comes out. So it redirects his behavior towards me rather than the animal out there. Socialization, yes, in an ideal world, you're going to keep everything super calm, but your dog's safety is paramount. And if you're needing to do a replacement behavior, you do so. If you live in more of a rural area, you've got to then look at livestock, bearing in mind that there's certain laws in certain areas. For example, back home in Scotland, if your dog is running into a field and bothering the livestock, the farmer is completely within their right to shoot your dog dead. So you've got to make sure that you've socialized your dog, not just for the obvious, but things like sheep, like bullocks, like heifers, like goats, whatever it is that you might come across. You've got to make sure that your dog is not going to get overexcited, is not going to want to run in there, because it could be the difference between life and death. Then, of course, you've got urban environments versus rural environments, indoors versus outdoors, different surfaces, things like that. So where we are, we've got many different surfaces, even within the condo, such as the poolside, the walkways, the exercise areas, all of this stuff. You've got to socialize all of this while your dog is experiencing this for the first time. That's a very important aspect of environment that a lot of people forget. And of course, situations, car rides, vet visits, grooming, household noises, novelty noises, and of course the big one, which is a completely different topic all by itself. That topic will be coming up on the podcast, and that is dogs and kids. You may notice that we're focusing on that quite heavily on the online side of things, and that's because it's become such a big issue. Okay, so what are the goals? Basically, you've got to build positive association to all of the things that you need to socialize your dog to. Reduce your dog's fear and anxiety, means that your dog is going to be less barky, less lungy, less bully. It means that your dog's not only just going to be behaving better, but they're going to be adaptable. They're going to be resilient. And that is very, very important. That's one of the biggest goals of socialization. Okay, so moving on to the techniques for effective socialization, because a lot of people just think, oh, you just expose them. Positive reinforcement is very, very important here. If you're working with somebody that doesn't agree with positive reinforcement, honestly, without beating around the bush, I'd look for somebody else. It is well known from many decades ago that positive reinforcement is the most effective way to educate both humans and animals. It goes all the way back to Pavlov's dogs. There's nothing rocket science about this. Whether or not you want to go into the realm of doing balanced, or whether you want to go into the realm of doing positive only, look, I would disagree with using any kind of punishment when it comes to socialization at all. But if you are, make sure you're doing mostly positive reinforcement, because it's better to do more good than anything else. Right. Positive reinforcement, nothing overly complicated about this. It basically means dog sees potential trigger or stimulus, dog gets reinforced with something positive. Your primary reinforcers are your obvious one, food. Then you've got play. Then you've got praise. So, food, love, praise. Food, love, play. Sorry. So, every single time that your dog sees another dog, a new person, a new surface they're walking on, anything like that, make sure that you're giving them one of these primary reinforcers to ensure that they're getting that endorphin rush in their brain, creating that positive association to it. Now, something that I always say to people to make sure that you are doing is create secondary reinforcers. These are things that are not necessarily natural rewards. They're things that need to be educated to the dog or conditioned. You've got basically good boy, good girl, yes, clickers, or even specific toys can be secondary reinforcers. You see a lot of the police dogs getting toys as not just their primary but also their secondary reinforcers. So even if they're being rewarded by the toy, it doesn't mean they need to play with the toy. It's the presentation of the toy that's actually the secondary reinforcer. Now, the reason we use secondary reinforcers is that you might not necessarily always have food on you. So you've got to make sure that you condition this so that you're able to not just train, but also continuously socialize your dog throughout their life. So even nowadays, so even when I was out for a walk with my boys this morning, there was one of these, they are mobility scooters, but they seem to be so jumped up that they're more like roadsters. And this guy passed on his mobility scooter going really quickly with music blaring out of a speaker from somewhere. And obviously this is very strange for my dogs. So the moment that the dogs noticed this, I just ensured that I told them all that they were good boys. So I reinforced that external stimulus, and that is the gist of positive reinforcement when it comes to socialization. Controlled introductions. Now, this is very important with regards to other animals, people, and children. So you may want to use leashes or barriers if you haven't got to the stage where you've got very good disengagement from your dog. But this is gradual exposure to new stimulus. This is a lot of people need to do this with their dogs and cats. Some people are just like, oh, I'll leave them to it, they'll be fine. Not always the case. Sometimes it's fine, sometimes that works, but I would prefer to err on the side of caution so nobody gets hurt. But this gradual controlled introduction is very important. Once you get to the stage where they can actually get close, you can have a 3-second rule. It takes roughly around about 3 seconds for them to decide what their next move is. So if you can get 3 seconds of sniffing, followed by redirection to a piece of food or a toy or something else, you're creating that positive reinforcement as well as having that controlled introduction. Creating positive experiences are incredibly important. This means that if you want to take your dog to the beach, you don't take them to the beach for the first time on a Saturday late morning when it's going to be ram-packed, full of people, full of dogs, full of kids. This could become very overwhelming and create flooding, which means your dog's never going to enjoy it again. So you want to start off at a quieter time, introduce your dog gently, ensure that they're not being overwhelmed. Super important when it comes to socialization. Practical exercises, and this really is one of the really important aspects of this. Number one, you've got to recognize signs of stress. So to make it easy for you guys, what I'll do is I'll just pull up the article that I wrote quite a while ago, actually, but on calming signals, and I'll post it into the group. And I'll also, I'll post it onto the comments here, but I'll also put it in the podcast notes for anybody listening to this on Spotify or anything else. So the article I've just posted there is a very brief overview. I didn't go into too much detail when I wrote this. It's actually quite an old article, and I'm looking at it. Not that old, 2019. But in it, I effectively speak about how to recognize stress in your dogs. So when you recognize any of that stress in your dog during socialization, it's very, very important that you adjust your approach. So does that mean that you're then going to shorten the leash, keep it loose, and move round so that you're blocking your dog from that stimulus? Or are you going to completely move away and restart another time? This is very, very important, especially when you look at the exercises. So, controlled play dates with well-socialized dogs. This one is really, really useful. But you've got to make sure that the play dates are with well-socialized dogs, not just dogs that are very, very friendly. So you don't just take your dog to the dog park on a random day and expect the dog to be well-socialized. Well-socialized does not mean incredibly friendly. Well-socialized means that your dog can go and interact nicely. So, for example, if I was to see somebody on the street and I ran up to them and gave them a huge hug and picked them up, but I didn't know them very well, that's not appropriate social behavior. So why do we think it's okay for the big Labrador to run straight into the dog park and run up to the smaller dog and barrel them over? Oh, it's okay, they're just being friendly. Nope, they're being overly friendly. They could actually be over-socialized. So we've got to ensure that the controlled playdates are with well-socialized dogs so that the dogs will learn from them. It's one thing that we do quite a lot of is we'll actually have my dogs or Jay's dogs work with some of our clients' dogs so that they're able to actually learn from each other a little bit better. So once your dog's a little bit more controlled with their socialization, you start to visit different environments, different parks, different walks, different streets, pet-friendly shops, pet-friendly cafes, pet-friendly bars. I tell you, and this is not just a plug, this is just something that I've noticed that's really useful. Where we do our group classes is at Doggy Retreat, in the bottom floor, the first floor of Doggy Retreat is OMD, which is Oh My Dog. And that's a bar cafe which is completely dog friendly. It is incredibly useful for the people that are at our group class to go then down there afterwards and have a coffee, have a beer, have whatever they want. But because they've been learning the stuff that we've been teaching them upstairs, when they go downstairs, they're putting it into practice. And it's incredibly useful for them. And it's really good for us to see as well. So that's basically the exercises that I would use for the generic socialization. Then you've got handling real life situations, preparing and managing for vet visits. This one's a little bit more tricky because you're not just socializing them to situations, you're socializing them to actual acts. So you've got to do shaping for thermometers, for stethoscopes, for injections. All of those things are incredibly important because if you don't do that, your dog's going to freak out when that vet pulls out that stethoscope and starts placing it to try and listen to the heart. You know, so you've got to just get this sort of stuff. It doesn't need to be the real thing. You can get toy stuff. We've done it with the same stuff that we give our daughter to play doctor with. That's what we use. So don't overcomplicate it for yourself, but make sure that your dogs are actually well versed in these movements. Do the same for eye drops, for ear drops, for things like that. When you're handling your dog, it can be as simple as when you clean their ear, make sure you give them a big old nice treat. When you check their eyes or you clean the gunk out of their eyes, big old treat after you've done that. Check their paws, big old treat. Because this might sound silly, guys, but when they need to go to the vet for something serious, you want them to be comfortable with the little things because they're going to be stressed about other things, whether that be discomfort, pain, anything like that. So, real life situation, you've got vets, you've got groomers, you've got boarding facilities potential if your dog's going to kennels. Make sure that you've picked your kennel if you're doing that way and you've visited it. You've visited the kennel, you've visited the people, so it's not all new to your dog. You know, any kennel, any boarder worth their salt will allow you to go and visit with your dog beforehand. And if they don't, it's kind of a red flag, you know? So then we've got to start looking at things like household items and noises, vacuum cleaners, brooms, movements. Do you have kids? That comes back to the children and dogs that we'll talk about at length another time. But all of this stuff is very, very realistic, and it's stuff that you need to think about during socializations. Then you've got to gradually increase the reality, the complexity, the intensity of these sort of things. So, for example, what I'll just do here is I will see if you guys can see the whiteboard there. Maybe you can. If you can, that's great. Then I can do this. Right. Okay, so if you're doing volume, let's say that you're wanting to do socialization for a baby crying or socialization to traffic. You might want to start off with noise if your dog's showing real nervousness with that. So that means you're going to start off with the volume super low. Once that volume is seeing the dog comfortable, then you can raise that. Raise it again. And you keep raising that until the dog is comfortable with the real life volume. Now, if this is the way that it works with volume, surely it stands to reason to work the same way with distance. So if your dog is struggling with socialization with somebody in the house, for example, let's say that your dog's bed's here. There we go, that's a wee dog. let's say the dog bed's there. And every single time your granny comes into the house and sits on the seat, your dog goes crazy. So what you need to do is look at the distance. What distance is there where your dog will not react? Keep your dog at that distance and reward. Then you can shorten the distance. If your dog's not comfortable, you go back a bit. Use the volume, use the distance, and use the duration to build reality. But while you're going through the socialization periods, you've got to do this controlled so that your dog is not struggling. Okay? Now, I apologize for anybody that's listening only on audio, because obviously you didn't see the whiteboard there. But effectively, the closer you are, the more intense the trigger is. So the further away you are, the less intense the trigger is. And that means that your dog's able to get rewarded appropriately before getting closer and thus more realistic. Okay? So, troubleshooting. Fear and anxiety. Right. What we just spoke about there was actually two things. One, that is troubleshooting for fear and anxiety. Gradual exposure using what we call counter conditioning. The dog sees the trigger, the dog hears the trigger, and before they react, because you've got this controlled to a lower level, then you're going to reward the dog to get the endorphins hitting in the brain, and you gradually make that more realistic. You've also got to make sure that when it's things that you can't control, that you're not putting your dog into overstimulation. So if you can't control things like how busy a street is or things like that, take breaks, monitor your dog's body language, make sure that the sessions are short. That is incredibly important when you're addressing overstimulation. Do not allow your dog to get overexcited. So if you go into the dog run, your dog gets super excited with other dogs, that's going to be a short session. The more your dog is chilled out at the first visit or the first introduction to the other dogs, the more you can allow them to play. Because overstimulation, when it's not controlled, can lead very, very quickly to being something else, which can be frustration, which can be potential reactivity. So when you're dealing with this sort of stuff, make sure that you are being consistent. You are being patient. Keep the sessions short. And if you're struggling, seek professional help, because there's certain situations where it's not going to be the same. I can give you generic advice here, but for certain dogs, you've got to make sure that you're dealing with their exact situation, their exact issue. Okay, guys. I wanted to make this one slightly shorter just because it's an important topic, and the shorter the podcasts are, the more people actually listen all the way through. So what I will ask is for anybody who has listened to this or watched this on Facebook or watched this on YouTube, if you have any questions about this, ask. And what I'll probably do is make a short video or an article about this to make sure that you guys are getting the information and the answers that you need. And if there's any questions, please let me know and I will get back to you. There doesn't seem to be any questions right this second, which is fine. And with that, I'll just do a quick reminder to everybody. The podcast, the live sessions like this are now every 2 weeks, simply because we were finding that every week it was getting a bit much, since we're getting quite busy with other areas of the business as well. So we want to try and keep this going, but we also don't want to burn out with it. So every 2 weeks, if you guys enjoy this, let us know. The more people that enjoy this, the more people that are sharing this, that are following this, Then we'll maybe go back to every week. And if you've got any topics that you want to be covered, please let us know as well. We really enjoy doing this, to be honest. It's just that trying to make sure we've got the time and setting that time aside is not always the easiest, especially when you've got sick daughters and Jays on reservists and all of that good stuff that happens. So in 2 weeks' time, we will be back. We've not decided the topic yet. So if you guys have got something that you want to hear, let us know and we will consider that one. And before we go, just to remind everyone that the Wagging Tail podcast is a Noble Canine podcast. We do online consultations. We are going to be launching online courses very soon. We do in-person, one-to-one private. We also do group classes in Singapore as well. So online, international, doesn't matter where you are, we are more than happy to help you. If you're in Singapore, we've got the group classes and the private sessions. If you need any help, reach out to us and we will let you know what would be best suited for your situation. And without further ado, guys, I will leave it there. I hope everyone has enjoyed this podcast, enjoyed this live, and we will see you next time. Cheers.